What was the most petty thing an adult did to you when you were younger? In Cub Scouts, we were doing the Pinewood Derby. I worked really hard on my car. My dad helped, of course. I had already won the first 3 rounds, and before the final round, one of the dads of the other kids picked up my car to hand it to me. It slipped out of his hand and broke the wheels when it hit the floor. I'm convinced it was not an accident, and he was sabotaging my car so his kid would win. This was over 30 years ago, and I'm still salty about it. I was feeling sick one day in grade 3 or 4 and the substitute teacher wouldn't let me go to the nurse's office because I didn't look sick enough. I had strep throat. I was in middle school at a friend's sleepover. Her parents were very strict. She and her siblings got pulled out of public school to go to a Catholic school, were homeschooled in high school, and they scared the heck out of me. Anyway, it was probably like 11 PM at this sleepover, and her mom hesitantly let us watch the Disney movie Zenon, Girl of the 21st Century. I laughed at her part, and even though her parents were awake, they came into the living room to scold me for being too loud. Not long after, I took a drink of water, choked, and started coughing. They called my parents after 11 PM to come pick me up because I couldn't behave. They had no regard for them being asleep and having jobs to get to early in the morning. They wanted me out for laughing and coughing in the span of about 10 minutes. My parents never let me stay the night at her house again and are still pissed at them for doing that almost 20 years later. I was at an Easter egg hunt when I was around 6. It was in a big park area with lots of rocks. I saw a little chocolate egg foil glisten and ran over to pick it up. As I reached my hand out to pick it up, a man trod on my hand to stop me getting it. Then he called his kid over to find it. When I was like 9 or 10, I was rollerblading home from my mom's work, right? And I'm heading down 4th Street, and I find something like $16 on the ground, a 10, a 5, and single just laying there on the sidewalk next to some outdoor seating at a cafe. Being the obnoxiously nice kid that I was, I pick it up and kind of look around, wondering if anybody lost their money. That's when the lady in the weird sweater vest comes around the corner. We make eye contact and I tell her I found this money, and she goes, "Huh, let me see it." And my naive ass is like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense. She's a grown up, she can sort this out." She looks around, hands me the single back, puts her finger to her mouth in a SHHH gesture, then she just fucks off, never to be seen again. My mom asked if I wanted to play 50 to card pickup while my friends were over. I asked her what it was, and she said I either want to play or I don't. I told her I didn't want to play anything if I didn't know what it was. She got visibly irritated and threw the cards on the ground and said, "This is 50 to card pickup, pick them up." She then threatened to ground me as she watched me pick the cards up and put them away nicely. I think it was worse because my friends were watching. When I was in like 5th grade, I didn't put a book cover on my math book. It required cutting up a paperback, something similar. We couldn't really afford the fancy ones, and I just never did it. So my math teacher took away my math book, so I couldn't do homework or follow along in class. Like WTF, who does that to a kid? When my mom found out, she went down to the school and raised hell about interfering with my right to an education or something. The school district was terrified of her until I graduated. Grounded me for leaving a hanger on the dryer, then extended it for reading, while grounded then further for sleeping, when told I can't read. Crap still pisses me off years later. In elementary school, I used to talk to the lunch lady every day, and then the one day I didn't say hi. She came to my lunch table and told me I was fake, funny, and a few other things, and stopped speaking to me. I still don't understand what her problem was. Had a teacher in kindergarten threaten to expel me because I was sick and didn't show up the day before. She put me on the spot in front of the whole class, telling me not to lie and that she'd call the principal. I cried in front of the whole class, not knowing what to do. Apparently she wanted to win some attendance award and thought confronting a child was a good idea. Like bruh, I was fking 5. Still salty on how she got away with it. I got in trouble in 6th grade for reading during homeroom. Homeroom was like a random 30-minute period to work on homework, but I always did my homework the night before, so I would just quietly read. For some reason my homeroom teacher hated it. One day she just yelled at me for always reading in her class and told me to do my homework. I told her all of my homework was done. She told me to prove it, so I showed her all of my completed homework. Then she confiscated my book and sent me to the principal's office for being disrespectful. I'm still salty about it. My aunt was unpleasant or weird with everyone but always particularly cold to me. One day when I was about 14 she took me aside and said she'd held a grudge against me because of my name. She had wanted to call her first daughter that name, but my parents had had a child first and used it. They had no idea she wanted the name and aren't the kind of people who would have done it on purpose. She said she'd tried really hard and had just about forgiven me for it. I just remember being baffled by it and then feeling sorry for her for being that spiteful, to be honest, but it pulled later in comparison with all the other crazy horrible things she did to her own family. My swimming teacher promised me a candy bar if I jumped off the board when I couldn't swim, and when I did they said they forgot, but I saw them eating one in the lounge. I was 5 and I was betrayed. Another thing that swim teacher did instead of teach me to swim was to try and teach the group how to keep their eyes open underwater and see. We all had goggles and had to take them off to do this. Also I didn't learn to swim there, I ended up learning at a hotel on vacation when my sister taught me like a year later. On the wedding day of my mom's 3rd wedding, I sat in my room alone crying cause it was hard, but I made sure to remove myself cause I didn't want to upset my mom. When my aunt came to check in on me and saw I was crying, she went and told my mom. My mom went out of her way to stop her and Macu to come into my room for being selfish and trying to ruin her happy day, even though I purposefully tried to not look upset in front of her in the first place. My swimming teacher removed my inflatable armbands while swimming in a deep part of the pool because I was not paying enough attention out of excitement. One of my uncles was in a years-long fight with my mom. To stir trouble, anytime he greeted my sister and I, he would tell my sister how beautiful and wonderful she is, and to me just say oh, you're here too, and then promptly ignore me the rest of the night. I used to adore him up to that point, so this ended up in me being extremely hurt and crying to my mom for hours about how I'm ugly and not special. He got his petty vengeance on my mother and crushed my self-esteem. Till today I don't forgive him for it. When I was young my mum was best friends with one of the neighbors down the street, who also had a boy the same age as me. As a result I played a lot with said boy and was encouraged to be best friends with him. Whenever my mum wasn't around though, his mum was a complete bee to me. She would come out to where we were playing together and shout at me for some minor trivial thing. If we were both doing something bad, only minorly bad, we were not bad kids, she would blame it all on me and never reprimand her son at all. This was all when I was like 7 to 10 years old, and so I couldn't process it at all and had no idea how to react, and it really got to me. I found out years later she was basically jealous because I was doing much better at school than her son and she wanted to take me down a peg. Ultimately the son and I ended up going to different secondary schools and drifted apart, which meant that fortunately I stopped having to interact with her. Our mums are still good friends, and she has always been pleasant to me as an adult. She even did the flowers at my wedding, but even 30 years later I still keep her at arm's length because of how unfairly she treated me as a child. My grade 2 science teacher taught us that there is no food we eat that doesn't come from plants. He gave the example of a cow. It eats grass, so it comes from plants. He offered $5 to anyone who could find anything that people eat that didn't come from plants, and said no one had ever claimed it. We all went home and thought about it. Kids were saying things like marshmallows, ice cream, candy. I put my hand up and answered salt. He was quiet for a moment and admitted that I was correct and no one had ever thought about that before, not even him, and that millions of people around the world eat salt every day. But he refused to give me the $5. Edit to stop the butt mushrooms, but algae comments, an organism that feeds on decayed organic matter, or on the waste products of other organisms that feed on decayed organic matter, would still fall under the umbrella of, without plants, they wouldn't have anything to eat, rule he had set up. I didn't know about the algae and didn't consider it a food when I was in grade 2, but I had actually thought about mushrooms and a kid did suggest them, but I knew that even mushrooms wouldn't have food if plants didn't exist. I could have mentioned any mineral, but I mentioned only the one we regularly ate. The lesson was on the food chain and how important plants were to our survival, that we would have nothing at all to eat if they didn't exist, you know, other than salt. In high school, I was suspended for letting out a little toot. We were almost out of ice cream. I made myself the last bowl. I came into the living room to eat it, and my dad took it and ate it all because I didn't offer him any. I was about 8. I'm 41 and I still hide while eating bowls of ice cream. Preschool me wasn't sure if shaking hands should come after or before getting awarded a prize on stage. Adults snatched my prize out of reach to a hall full of guffawing adults. Preschool me burst out in tears and was led off stage. Parents scolded me for making her look bad. I was a chubby kid, so when I was 12 I decided I would go for runs around the neighborhood at dusk so people wouldn't stare at the fat kid so much. On the second or third run, some guy walking his dog unleashes it and sicks it on me for craps and giggles, and calls it back just before it gets to me. I stopped going for runs after that. Edit, for everyone asking, this was quite a while ago, and I did eventually get back into running a few years later. Even ran a half marathon a while back. This was when I was a teenager, but for my Eagle Scout project, you had to have a proposal and get it through several levels of clearance. My proposal was very good. I was the only person in years to get through the initial level of clearance without having to revise it. Unfortunately at the district level, there was a stick in the mud who believed that he wasn't doing his job unless he rejected every proposal at least once. He rejected mine after an hour and a half of arguing for not including ladder safety measures. So I printed out a 150-page manual on ladders and put that in front of him. Unfortunately it was not the same guy, so I didn't get to see his face. I told the other guy what happened when he asked why the proposal was so massive. He thought it was hilarious. Thank you for watching the video. Tell us your stories in the comments below. Happy Spooktober. Oh.